Rancher rescued an Apache child. Then her stunning mother appeared and changed his fate. The sun was low over the sprawling ranch, casting long shadows across the dry grasses that stretched as far as the eye could see. The rancher, a man named Thomas, had lived here alone for many years. The cattle were his companions, the wind his constant visitor, and the open land both his comfort and his challenge. Life on the ranch was hard, but Thomas was used to it. He rose early every day, checked the fences, fed the animals, and repaired what needed fixing. The routine was steady, predictable, and for him, it was enough. That afternoon, Thomas had been riding along the northern pasture, checking the boundary where the land met the cliffs. He liked this part of the ranch. The canyon below was deep, and the wind sang strange songs as it passed through the rocks. He was scanning for any signs of trouble with the cattle when a faint cry carried on the wind. It was soft, almost lost, but unmistakably the voice of a child. Thomas paused, listening carefully. At first, he thought it might be the wind itself whistling through the canyon, but then he heard it again, clearer this time, a frightened wail that sent a chill down his spine. Without hesitation, he spurred his horse toward the sound. The canyon was steep and treacherous, and Thomas knew he had to be careful. One wrong step could send him tumbling down the rocks. The cries grew louder as he rode, and soon he could see movement among the boulders below. It was a small figure, barely more than a shadow against the rugged stones. As he got closer, he could see her clearly, a little Apache girl no older than 6 or 7. Her clothes were torn, and her face was streaked with dirt and tears. She was alone, shivering, and clearly scared. Thomas's heart tightened. He had never seen a child in such danger, and instinctively he knew he had to help her. He dismounted, careful with each step as he made his way down the slope. "Hey there," he said gently, keeping his voice calm so as not to frighten her further. "It's all right, I'm here to help." The girl froze, staring at him with wide dark eyes. She did not speak English, only making small, frightened noises. Thomas crouched down, keeping himself at her level. "I won't hurt you," he said softly, extending a hand. Slowly, she inched closer, unsure but drawn by the kindness in his tone. Thomas could see the cuts on her knees and arms, and he knew she must have fallen or crawled over the rough rocks. He wrapped a blanket around her small shoulders, holding her gently. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said. Carrying her carefully, he climbed back up the rocks, mindful of every step. The little girl clung to him, her tiny arms around his neck, trembling from fear and cold. By the time they reached the top, Thomas's arms ached, but he did not complain. She was safe now. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. The girl stayed close to him, her head resting against his chest. Thomas spoke softly the entire way, telling her about the ranch, the animals, and the food she would get once they arrived. He could see the tension in her small body slowly ease, though her eyes remained wary, always watching, always cautious. Once at the ranch, Thomas set her down gently in the kitchen. The warm air from the stove brushed against her chilled skin. He prepared a simple meal, bread, some milk, and dried meat. The girl stared at the food, hesitant, then began to eat slowly. Thomas watched her carefully, knowing that trust had to be earned, not demanded. He gave her a clean blanket and let her rest in a small room he had prepared for visitors. She curled up, still quiet, but Thomas could see the relief in her eyes. She was safe, warm, and no longer alone. Over the next few days, Thomas worked to help her feel comfortable. He called her Little Star because she seemed bright and fragile, like a tiny light that needed protection. Communication was difficult. She spoke only in her native language, and Thomas knew just a few words of Apache from old books he had read. Yet, despite the barrier, they began to understand each other in small ways. Gestures, smiles, and simple actions became their bridge. Thomas made sure she had clean clothes, a warm bed, and plenty of food. He took her out to see the animals, letting her feed the chickens and watch the cows. She laughed quietly at first, a sound so rare that it made Thomas smile with relief. It was a small victory, but to him, it meant the world. He could see a spark of life returning to her, a sense of safety that had been missing. He also began to notice how resilient she was. Even after her ordeal, she tried to do small things on her own, carrying a basket of eggs, helping water the garden, or holding a calf while he checked it for injuries. Thomas admired her courage. She had been through so much, yet she kept going. Word of the little girl spread to nearby towns. Some people were curious, others suspicious. Questions came. Who was she? Where did she come from? Was it safe for her to be there? Thomas ignored the gossip, focusing only on her well-being. He knew that protecting her meant keeping her close and keeping her safe from those who might not understand. Nights on the ranch were quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed in around the small cabin and made every sound more noticeable. The girl would sometimes wake up, crying softly in her sleep. Thomas would sit by her bed until she calmed down, whispering words she could not understand but that carried comfort in their tone. Over time, she began to sleep longer stretches, her fear slowly giving way to trust. Thomas also learned more about her through observation. She liked the songs of birds in the morning, the smell of fresh bread from the oven, and the gentle sway of the rocking chair by the porch. He tried to create routines that would make her feel at home, little by little building a sense of stability that she had been missing in her short life. Even though Thomas was a man used to solitude, he found himself talking to her more than he realized. He told stories of his childhood, of the land, and the animals, hoping she might understand the world she was now part of. She listened quietly, sometimes smiling, sometimes simply watching him with those deep, thoughtful eyes. As days turned into weeks, Thomas realized that rescuing her was more than an act of kindness. It was a turning point not just for her, but for him as well. The ranch that had once been a place of routine and loneliness now carried laughter, curiosity, and the beginnings of connection. The little girl, fragile and afraid at first, had begun to bloom under his care. He knew, deep down, that life had a way of changing unexpectedly. A simple act, a decision to follow the sound of a cry in the canyon, had brought a new purpose into his life. The little Apache girl had changed everything. Thomas felt a sense of responsibility, but also something more subtle. A quiet hope that through care and patience they could both find something they had been missing all along. Trust, friendship, and perhaps even family. As the sun set over the wide-open land, casting golden light across the ranch, Thomas sat on the porch and watched her play near the chickens. She had begun to laugh freely, a pure sound that made the ranch feel alive in a way it never had before. Thomas knew there were challenges ahead: communication, safety, and the question of her family. But for now, he allowed himself to enjoy the moment. For the first time in years, the ranch did not feel empty. It was filled with the small, fragile life of a little girl. And in saving her, Thomas had unknowingly begun a journey that would change both of their lives forever. The canyon that had seemed so lonely before now held a story of courage, trust, and a bond that had only just begun to grow. And so, in the quiet of the frontier, under the fading light of day, Thomas made a silent promise he would keep her safe. He would give her warmth, food, and protection. And he would stand by her, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The little Apache girl was no longer alone, and for Thomas, the ranch had become a place of new beginnings. Days passed, and the little Apache girl, whom Thomas had begun calling Little Star, slowly adjusted to life on the ranch. She was still shy and cautious, but the fear that had gripped her when he first found her began to fade little by little. Each morning she woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the warm sunlight spilling across the wooden floorboards of her small room. Thomas had made sure the space felt safe and comfortable, with a soft blanket, a small chair, and a few toys he had found at the town's trading post. At first she remained quiet, observing everything with wide, cautious eyes. Thomas understood that patience was necessary. He did not rush her to speak or act, and he let her explore her surroundings at her own pace. Every small smile or gesture of trust felt like a victory. He would kneel beside her when she showed something new, whether it was a flower growing near the porch or a calf taking its first wobbly steps. "See that," he would say gently. "It's all yours to watch." She would nod or sometimes reach out to touch the animals, the trust in her tiny actions slowly building. The routine of the ranch became their bridge. Every day Thomas would involve her in chores that were simple but meaningful. She learned to feed the chickens, carry water to the garden, and help gather eggs. Each task was a lesson not just in responsibility, but also in trust. Thomas showed her patience, explaining every action with gentle words and soft encouragement. Though she spoke little English, his tone carried warmth, and she responded with smiles, gestures, and shy laughter. Thomas noticed that she had a keen sense of observation. She could track a lost chicken by sound, spot a stray calf among the herd, and even find small herbs growing in the fields. Her eyes were sharp, her movements careful, and though small and fragile, she carried a strength that amazed him. He began to admire her resilience, the way she had survived alone in the canyon, relying only on herself to stay alive. Evenings on the ranch were the hardest for her. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the shadows grew long, bringing with them memories that she could not yet speak of. Sometimes she would cry quietly while Thomas prepared supper or tended the horses. He would sit beside her, holding her hands, humming a soft tune he remembered from childhood. she would eventually calm, resting her head on his shoulder as he whispered words of comfort. Food became another way to build connection. Thomas would show her how to bake bread, boil eggs, and cook simple meals over the fire. She began to mimic his actions, her small hands carefully shaping dough, stirring stews, and setting plates. It was a slow process, but the joy of creating something together, something that was both nourishing and comforting, helped her feel grounded. She even began to offer Thomas little smiles and nods, a quiet acknowledgement that she was beginning to trust him. Thomas also introduced her to books. Though she could not read English yet, he would show her pictures and tell stories pointing to animals, landscapes, and people. She would trace the images with her tiny fingers, her dark eyes sparkling with curiosity. Storytelling became a ritual. Every night Thomas would read or speak softly about adventures, lands far away, and the wonders of the world. She listened attentively, absorbing the rhythm of words, the patterns of language, and the gentle cadence of his voice. One day, Thomas decided to take her beyond the ranch. He saddled his horse and carefully lifted her onto the small seat in front of him. They rode slowly toward a nearby creek, where the water was clear and calm. She had never seen water like this, never felt its cool touch against her hands. She dipped her fingers into the creek, giggling quietly as the water splashed. Thomas smiled, glad to see her enjoying something so simple, something so ordinary to him but extraordinary to her. The trip to the creek became a regular part of their routine. She learned to enjoy the rhythm of the horse, the sway of the land, and the beauty of nature that surrounded the ranch. Thomas explained the different animals, plants, and birds they saw along the way. "That's a hawk," he said one day, pointing to a bird circling above. "It watches over the land, just like I watch over you." She tilted her head, trying to understand, then gave a small, shy smile. Despite these moments of happiness, Thomas knew the girl carried memories that were heavy, though he could not yet understand them fully. There were times she would stare into the distance, her eyes distant and clouded with something painful. He never pressed her to speak. He knew that healing took time, that trust could not be forced. Instead, he offered her presence, stability, and patience, letting her know that she was safe without needing to explain herself. As weeks turned into months, their bond deepened. Thomas began to notice how much he relied on her presence, too. The ranch, once quiet and solitary, now carried laughter, small footsteps, and the quiet rustle of someone exploring and learning. He found himself talking more, sharing stories of his life, of his childhood on the land, and even small dreams he had long forgotten. The girl listened attentively, sometimes responding with gestures or quiet words, the connection growing between them. The townspeople had begun to hear about the little girl on the ranch. Some were curious, others skeptical, questioning why a lone rancher would care for an Apache child. Thomas ignored their whispers. He knew that the girl's safety and comfort mattered far more than the opinions of strangers. He focused on her growth, her learning, and her happiness. She began to smile more openly, laugh at small jokes he made, and even attempt a few words in English. Each new word was a small victory, a bridge connecting their two worlds. Thomas also introduced her to other animals on the ranch, horses, sheep, and even the family dog that had been his only companion for years. She learned to care for them gently, feeding, brushing, and observing. In return, the animals seemed to sense her gentle spirit, responding with trust and calmness. Watching her interact with the creatures made Thomas proud. It was clear she was adapting, learning, and finding her place in this new life. One quiet evening, Thomas took her outside to watch the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the land bathed in soft golden light. She leaned against him, her small hand in his, and for the first time, he felt a deep sense of hope. The fear that had once dominated her life was slowly fading, replaced by trust, comfort, and the beginnings of joy. He realized then that rescuing her had not only saved her life, but had changed his own. He had spent so many years in solitude, yet now, with her presence, he felt a sense of purpose, responsibility, and connection he had never experienced before. The ranch, which had once been just land and animals, had become a place of growth, learning, and the quiet beginnings of a family. Even in small moments, the laughter of a child, the gentle touch of her hand, or the curiosity in her eyes, Thomas saw proof of change. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, understanding her past, helping her speak freely, and finding the right way to connect with her family. But for now, he focused on the small victories, the daily progress, and the fragile trust they were building together. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, Little Star whispered her first clear words in English, "Home." In that simple word, he heard everything he had hoped for. the feeling of safety, belonging, and the promise of something brighter ahead. Life on the ranch continued, shaped by the gentle routines, shared work, and the growing bond between them. Each day she learned a little more, laughed a little louder, and trusted a little deeper. Thomas understood that this journey was only beginning, that each moment mattered, and that the path they were walking together would shape both of their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. Through patience, kindness, and the small victories of everyday life, the rancher and the little Apache girl were building a world of safety, trust, and quiet joy. It was a life neither had expected, yet both had come to treasure. And in the heart of the frontier, among the cattle, the land, and the setting sun, their story of resilience, trust, and hope was quietly unfolding. One warm morning, Thomas was feeding the chickens when he heard the faint sound of someone calling from the road that led to the ranch. At first he thought it was just a traveler passing by, but the voice was firm, confident, and carried a sense of purpose he could not ignore. Curious and cautious, he walked toward the fence, scanning the road. At a distance, he saw a woman approaching. She moved with grace and confidence, her presence commanding without being loud. There was something striking about her. Her dark hair framed a face that was both beautiful and strong, her eyes sharp and clear, yet full of warmth. As she drew closer, Thomas noticed the familiar features of the little girl clinging to her skirt. His heart stopped for a moment. Could this be? The woman reached the gate and paused, looking directly at Thomas. "Is she here?" the woman asked, her voice steady but gentle. She was speaking English, but with an accent he could not place. Thomas felt a mix of curiosity, caution, and surprise. "Yes," he said carefully. "She's here." "She's safe." The little girl ran forward, her small arms reaching toward the woman. Thomas watched as the child's face lit up with recognition and relief. The bond between mother and daughter was immediate and undeniable. The woman knelt down, wrapping the girl in a strong embrace, holding her close as if she had been gone for an eternity. Thomas stood back, quietly observing, sensing the depth of the connection he could not yet understand. After a few moments, the woman looked up at Thomas. Her eyes held gratitude, respect, and a hint of curiosity. "Thank you," she said simply. Thomas nodded, unsure how much to say. "It was nothing," he replied, though he knew it had been far from nothing. Caring for the child had changed his life in ways he had only begun to understand. The woman introduced herself as Island. She explained that she had been searching for her daughter for months, tracking her through the canyons, villages, and trails. Her voice carried a quiet strength, and Thomas could see the pain of worry and the relief of reunion in her eyes. Little Star clung to her mother, whispering words that Thomas could not understand but could see were filled with love and trust. Island spent the afternoon at the ranch, carefully observing the home her daughter had found with Thomas. She noticed the care he had taken: clean clothes, a warm bed, and a life filled with small joys. She looked at Thomas with appreciation, understanding that this man had kept her child safe when she could not. Her gaze was steady, not demanding, but filled with a quiet admiration that Thomas found both humbling and powerful. Over the next few days, Thomas and Island began to talk more. She shared the story of her life, the hardships she had faced, and the dangers that had forced her child into the canyon. Thomas listened quietly, learning about her culture, the traditions she held dear, and the strength she had carried as a mother searching for her child. Her courage impressed him. She had faced obstacles that he could barely imagine, yet she remained calm, focused, and determined. Little Star blossomed even more with her mother present. She laughed freely, spoke in short phrases, and shared stories of her adventures on the ranch. Island observed her daughter with pride, seeing the care Thomas had provided and the bond they had built. She knew it was rare to find someone who could connect so deeply with her child, someone who had shown patience, kindness, and understanding. Thomas began to notice changes in himself as well. Island's presence stirred feelings he had never experienced. He admired her resilience, her wisdom, and the quiet confidence she carried. Their conversations were filled with mutual respect, and gradually, a sense of trust began to form between them. They worked together to help Little Star feel safe, creating routines that blended both cultures, the skills Thomas knew from the ranch and the traditions Island valued as an Apache mother. Island introduced Thomas to small customs from her culture. She showed him ways to gather herbs, make simple crafts, and understand the land in ways he had never considered. Thomas watched, fascinated, as the little girl absorbed these lessons, learning to balance both her worlds. It was a learning experience for all three of them. Thomas realized that raising a child was not just about providing food and shelter. It was about teaching, understanding, and nurturing the soul. The relationship between Thomas and Island deepened over shared work and quiet conversations. They repaired fences together, tended the animals, and cooked meals for the little girl. There was a comfort in their teamwork, a rhythm that neither had expected but both began to cherish. They learned to communicate without words at times, sharing glances, gestures, and small smiles that conveyed understanding. Thomas found himself drawn to her not only as a mother, but as a person of strength and warmth. One afternoon, while sitting by the creek with Little Star playing nearby, Aylin shared stories of her own childhood. She spoke of the lands she had traveled, the people she had known, and the lessons she had learned. Thomas listened intently, realizing how much he had yet to understand about the world outside his ranch. He felt a growing respect for her, not just for her courage, but for the wisdom she carried. She had endured hardships, yet she faced life with calm determination and love for her daughter. Little Star watched them quietly, her small presence a reminder of the bond that had brought them together. She had been the reason Thomas and Aylin had met, the catalyst for a connection neither of them had anticipated. Thomas thought about the day he had rescued her, the fear and loneliness in her eyes, and how that simple act had changed the course of his life. Now, with her mother by his side, he realized that the future was beginning to look brighter than it ever had before. The days turned into weeks, and the little household began to settle into a new rhythm. Thomas, Aylin, and Little Star shared meals, chores, and quiet moments together. The ranch, once a place of solitude for Thomas, was now filled with laughter, learning, and connection. Aylin's presence brought balance, her knowledge complementing Thomas's experience. Together, they created a home that was safe, nurturing, and full of love. Thomas also began to understand the importance of culture and tradition. Aylin taught him about the Apache ways, the respect for the land, the lessons carried in stories, and the connection to family. Thomas realized that raising Little Star was not just about teaching her the ranch's life, but also honoring her heritage. He began to see the land through her eyes, appreciating the beauty and meaning she found in every plant, animal, and story. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting warm light across the ranch, Thomas and Aylin sat together on the porch. Little Star played nearby, laughing and chasing the dog. They watched in silence, the quiet connection between them deepening. Aylin placed her hand on Thomas's, a gesture of trust and gratitude. He felt a warmth he had not known for years, a sense of belonging and hope. Over time, Thomas realized that his life was no longer his own. The rescue of Little Star had started a chain of events that had brought Aylin into his world. Her presence had changed the rhythm of his days, filled his home with warmth, and introduced him to feelings he had long buried. He admired her strength, her kindness, and the way she cared for her daughter. Aylin, too, had begun to see Thomas in a new light. She respected his courage, his patience, and the way he had cared for her child without hesitation. She saw the goodness in him, the steady strength that came from years of living close to the land. Slowly she allowed herself to trust him, to accept that their lives had crossed for a reason, and that together they could create something meaningful for her daughter. Evenings were spent sharing stories, planning for the future, and enjoying simple pleasures, meals by the fire, walks across the ranch, and quiet moments watching the stars. Thomas taught Little Star how to ride a horse, while Aylin shared songs and tales from her own childhood. The little girl absorbed both worlds, learning to balance the traditions of her mother with the lessons of the ranch. The bond between the three grew stronger with every passing day. Thomas and Aylin worked together seamlessly, communicating through gestures, shared work, and the quiet understanding that comes from mutual respect. They faced small challenges, the unpredictability of the weather, the needs of the animals, and the occasional difficulty of communication. But together, they overcame them. Each success strengthened the household, building trust and connection that would carry them into the future. Through it all, Thomas realized that rescuing Little Star had not only saved her life, but had opened a door to a future he had never imagined. Aylin's arrival had transformed his world, introducing love, family, and a sense of purpose he had long thought lost. He felt gratitude for the unexpected turn of events, knowing that fate had led him to a new beginning, one filled with hope, trust, and connection. And so, in the quiet of the frontier, with the warm glow of the sun and the gentle sounds of the ranch, Thomas, Aylin, and Little Star began a new chapter together. It was a chapter of healing, learning, and growing. A chapter where love and trust bridged the gap between past hardships and a hopeful future. Their lives, once separate, were now intertwined, and each day brought new opportunities to strengthen the bond that had brought them together. Life on the ranch grew brighter and busier, with Aylin and Little Star now part of Thomas's daily world. The mornings were filled with the soft clucking of chickens, the lowing of cows, and the laughter of a child learning new things. Thomas found himself waking earlier, eager to see the two of them begin their day. The rhythm of the ranch had changed, but in a way that brought warmth to the long hours he had once spent alone. Island adapted quickly to the routines, helping with chores and guiding little Star through daily tasks. The little girl loved this time, learning from both of them, combining the ranch skills Thomas taught with the traditions Island shared. She would carry buckets of water, brush the horses, or gather eggs, while Aylin encouraged her in gentle, patient tones. Thomas watched them closely, noticing how Aylin's approach was calm and nurturing, balancing his own practical guidance with her quiet wisdom. As the days passed, Thomas and Aylin found themselves working side by side more often. Whether repairing fences, tending the animals, or preparing meals, they began to understand each other without words at times. A glance could communicate instructions, a smile could show agreement, and a shared laugh could break the tension after a long day of labor. Their admiration for each other grew steadily, each small gesture of care building a deeper connection. One afternoon, Thomas and Aylin took Little Star to the creek. She loved playing there, throwing stones into the water and watching the ripples spread across the surface. Aylin taught her to skip stones, showing her the precise motion and the rhythm of the throw. Thomas watched from a distance, leaning against a tree, his heart warming as he saw the joy in both their faces. He realized that he had never truly understood the beauty of family before, nor the quiet happiness that could be found in simple, shared moments. Little Star ran to Thomas, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Papa, look!" she exclaimed, throwing a stone that skipped 3 times before sinking. Thomas laughed and ruffled her hair. "Well done," he said. She giggled and ran back to Aylin, repeating the action with her mother's guidance. Watching them, Thomas felt a sense of contentment he had never thought possible. The little household, once strangers brought together by chance, was now a team, a family in the making. As the weeks went on, Thomas and Aylin spent more quiet moments together, often while Little Star slept or played nearby. They shared stories of their pasts, spoke of dreams and fears, and discovered common values. Thomas admired Aylin's courage and patience, while she respected his strength and reliability. Slowly, unspoken feelings began to emerge. It was subtle at first, a lingering glance, a touch of hands during work, a quiet smile, but both sensed that their bond was growing deeper than friendship. Thomas was careful not to rush anything. He knew that the trust between them had to come naturally, without pressure. Aylin, too, was mindful, understanding the boundaries of respect and patience. Their growing feelings were a gentle undercurrent, enriching their interactions and making even mundane tasks feel meaningful. Every shared laugh, every moment of cooperation brought them closer together, and yet they both knew the most important thing was the happiness and safety of Little Star. Little Star, of course, noticed the closeness between them in her own way. Children are perceptive. And she often giggled when Thomas and Aylin exchanged a glance or worked together seamlessly. She began to understand that this new household was filled with warmth, love, and care from both adults. Her trust in Thomas deepened, and her attachment to Aylin grew stronger. She was thriving in a way she never had before, and her laughter became a constant melody in the ranch. One day, a sudden storm rolled over the hills. The wind howled, and rain poured down in heavy sheets. Thomas and Aylin hurried to secure the animals and bring Little Star inside. They worked together efficiently, communicating with gestures and brief words over the roar of the wind. Once everyone was safe inside the cabin, they lit the fire and sat together, damp and exhausted. Thomas looked at Aylin, noticing the strength in her posture, the calm in her eyes, and the way she'd handled the chaos. He felt admiration, gratitude, and a deep sense of connection all at once. Aylin smiled at him, her eyes meeting his. "You are strong," she said simply. Thomas shook his head, laughing softly. "Not as strong as you," he replied. For a moment, the storm outside felt distant, insignificant compared to the quiet bond forming between them. Little Star snuggled between them, her small hand holding each of theirs, a living symbol of the connection they had built together. As the weeks continued, Thomas and Aylin began teaching Little Star lessons that combined their worlds. She learned how to ride a horse with confidence, how to gather herbs safely, and how to understand the land around her. Aylin shared stories of her ancestors, teaching Little Star about bravery, wisdom, and respect for nature. Thomas added his own lessons, showing her how to care for animals, repair fences, and handle the challenges of ranch life. The little girl soaked up these teachings eagerly, her confidence and joy growing with every day. One evening, Thomas and Aylin sat outside after dinner, watching the sunset over the horizon. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of red and orange, the land bathed in golden light. Thomas felt a deep sense of peace as he looked at Aylin. The respect, trust, and quiet admiration he had for her had grown into something more, a feeling he had not expected but welcomed wholeheartedly. Aylin reached out and touched his hand, a gentle gesture of acknowledgement and connection. Thomas held it, feeling a warmth that went beyond words. They began sharing small moments of tenderness. A hand on a shoulder while guiding little Star, a quiet conversation by the fire, a laugh shared at a simple joke. These moments built a foundation of trust, comfort, and subtle affection, neither rushed, knowing that love that grows naturally is stronger and more enduring. Every act of care for little Star, every shared task on the ranch, and every moment of understanding between Thomas and Aylin strengthened their bond. Even in simple routines, they found joy. Mornings spent feeding animals, afternoons repairing fences, and evenings by the fire became opportunities to connect, teach, and share their lives. Little Star's laughter filled the spaces between tasks, a reminder of why they were building this life together. Thomas realized that his days, once lonely and predictable, were now rich with purpose, joy, and the beginnings of a deep, enduring love. Aylin noticed the same changes in herself. She had come to the ranch seeking her child, uncertain of what she would find. Instead, she found a home, a partner she could trust, and a life that felt fuller than anything she had known. She admired Thomas not only for his strength and skill, but for his patience, kindness, and the gentle way he cared for both her and her daughter. The quiet connection between them grew, woven through shared experiences, laughter, and mutual respect. Together they faced the challenges of ranch life, the unpredictability of the weather, and the needs of the animals. Each success, each day without disaster, strengthened their trust and reliance on one another. They learned to anticipate each other's actions, to communicate through gestures and glances, and to support one another without hesitation. Their bond became a foundation upon which Little Star could thrive, a safe environment filled with love, learning, and warmth. One crisp morning, Thomas watched Aylin teaching Little Star to identify wildflowers along the edge of the pasture. The little girl's eyes sparkled with curiosity and delight, her small fingers tracing the petals as Aylin spoke. Thomas felt a deep sense of gratitude for the woman by his side. Her presence had transformed the ranch, filled it with light and laughter, and made him realize the depth of connection and love that life could offer. As the day drew to a close, Thomas, Aylin, and Little Star gathered by the fire, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet companionship. Thomas knew that the life they were building together was special, rare, and meaningful. It was more than just survival on the frontier. It was a life of trust, respect, love, and hope. And as the stars appeared overhead, casting a soft glow on the land, Thomas and Aylin exchanged a look filled with understanding. Their bond had grown stronger, gentle and patient, yet undeniable. Little Star slept peacefully between them, the living symbol of the connection that had brought them together. The ranch, once a place of solitude, was now a home filled with warmth, laughter, and love. Through every shared task, every quiet conversation, and every act of care for Little Star, Thomas and Aylin had built more than a household. They had built a family where trust, respect, and love could flourish, and where the hardships of the past could be replaced with hope for the future. The bond between them was quiet but powerful, a reminder that love often grows in the most unexpected ways, nurtured through patience, understanding, and shared experience. And so, in the heart of the frontier, surrounded by the land, the animals, and the laughter of a child, Thomas and Aylin discovered that life could be beautiful, full, and rich with meaning. Their journey was far from over, but each day brought them closer together, creating a story of love, resilience, and family that would last a lifetime. The days on the ranch had settled into a steady rhythm, yet each day brought something new to cherish. Thomas, Aylin, and Little Star had become inseparable, their lives intertwined in ways none of them had anticipated. The ranch was alive with laughter, the sounds of animals, and the quiet conversation shared over chores, meals, and evening fires. Thomas often reflected on how much his life had changed since the day he had followed the cries in the canyon. Little Star's arrival had set everything in motion, and now, with Aylin by his side, he felt a sense of completeness he had never known. One morning, Thomas woke to the smell of fresh bread. He stepped outside to find Aylin kneading dough, Little Star sitting nearby, watching and learning. Thomas smiled, the simple scene filling him with warmth. It was moments like these that reminded him of the life they were building together. Ordinary, yet extraordinary because it was shared. He walked over, bending down to ruffle Little Star's hair. "Good morning, Little Star," he said. She giggled, pointing to the bread. "Mama make," she said proudly. Thomas nodded, impressed by her growing confidence in language. After breakfast, they went out to the pastures to check the cattle. Thomas rode alongside Island, who was learning quickly how to handle the horses. Little Star followed on a small pony, her laughter ringing across the open land. It was a perfect morning. Sunlight spilling over the hills, the smell of fresh grass, and the gentle hum of life on the ranch. Thomas felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had rescued a child from danger, and in doing so, had found family, love, and purpose. Over the weeks, Thomas and Aylin continued to grow closer. Their conversations deepened beyond daily routines. They spoke of dreams, hopes, and the futures they envisioned. Aylin shared stories of her childhood and her people, teaching Thomas about traditions, courage, and the wisdom of generations. Thomas shared tales of his life on the frontier, the struggles, the quiet victories, and the lessons learned from the land. Each story revealed new layers of understanding and admiration. Their connection became undeniable, a quiet bond built on trust, respect, and shared experience. One afternoon, a small challenge tested their unity. A sudden storm rolled over the hills, darker and stronger than any they had seen in weeks. The wind howled and rain fell in thick sheets, threatening to sweep across the ranch. Thomas and Aylin worked together to secure the animals, moving them to shelter, tying horses, and gathering the chickens. Little Star stayed close to them, holding Aylin's hand tightly. The storm was chaotic, yet in the middle of it, Thomas felt the strength of their bond. Together, they faced every challenge with calm determination, their trust in one another evident in every movement. By the time the storm passed, the ranch was intact and the animals were safe. Thomas and Aylin, drenched and exhausted, collapsed near the fire, drying their clothes and catching their breath. Little Star cuddled between them, her small hand resting on each of theirs. In that quiet moment, Thomas realized something profound. He had found more than love. He had found a partner, a family, and a life that was richer than he had ever imagined. Aylin looked at him with a gentle smile, her eyes reflecting the same realization. Words were unnecessary. The connection between them was clear, steady and unspoken. As the weeks turned into months, Thomas, Aylin, and Little Star continued to grow together. The little girl thrived under their combined care. She learned to speak more fluently, ride horses with confidence, and navigate both the ranch and the lessons of her heritage. Thomas taught her skills for the land, while Elaine shared the stories, traditions, and wisdom of her people. The balance of these worlds allowed Little Star to grow strong, confident, and happy. Her laughter became a constant melody across the ranch, a symbol of resilience and joy. Thomas and Aylin also made plans for the future. They spoke quietly in the evenings about expanding the ranch, improving the home, and ensuring Little Star had every opportunity to learn and grow. They discussed ways to honor her heritage while preparing her for the challenges of frontier life. Their conversations were filled with hope, careful planning, and the quiet acknowledgement of the love that had grown between them. One day, Thomas took Aylin aside while Little Star explored the pasture. He looked into her eyes, feeling a mixture of nervousness and certainty. "I never imagined this life," he said softly. "But I can't picture it without you, or her." Aylin reached out, taking his hand. "Nor I without you," she replied. There was no need for grand gestures or elaborate words. Their feelings were clear, solid, and true. In that moment, the partnership they had built became love. Steady, patient, and enduring. Little Star sensed the change as well. She often giggled when Thomas and Aylin exchanged quiet smiles, or when they worked together seamlessly. She began to understand, in her own way, that the three of them were a family. Her trust, confidence, and happiness grew with each passing day, bolstered by the love and stability surrounding her. The ranch had become a home, not just a place to live, but a sanctuary filled with care, teaching, and affection. As the seasons changed, so did the landscape around the ranch. Spring brought fresh green growth, summer the warmth of long days, autumn the rich colors of the hills, and winter a quiet, snowy stillness. Through every change, Thomas, Aylin, and Little Star faced challenges and joys together. They repaired fences, cared for the animals, and celebrated small victories, like the first calf of the season or Little Star learning to ride a horse without guidance. Each moment strengthened their connection and deepened their bond. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Little Star leaned against Thomas, her small hand in his, while Aylin rested her head on his shoulder. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and pink, the land bathed in golden light. Thomas looked at them both, feeling a sense of peace and fulfillment he had never known. The rescue in the canyon had been only the beginning. It had led to this life, a life of love, family, and hope. The story of their lives was no longer one of loneliness or struggle, but one of connection and growth. Thomas had learned the value of patience, trust, and compassion. Aylin had found safety, partnership, and respect. Little Star had discovered love, guidance, and a home where she could thrive. Together, they had built a family, a life filled with joy, understanding, and shared purpose. Thomas often reflected on how unexpected life could be. A simple decision to follow the cries of a frightened child had transformed his world. That one act of courage had led to the reunion of a mother and daughter, the formation of a family, and the discovery of love he had long thought impossible. Each day reinforced the lesson that life's greatest gifts often come from small, selfless actions carried out with courage and kindness. Over time, their bond continued to strengthen. Thomas and Aylin's love grew quietly, without haste or pressure, built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and the deep trust formed through raising Little Star together. Their household became a model of harmony, where learning, laughter, and care flowed naturally. Little Star, confident and happy, embodied the success of their efforts and the power of connection. As the years passed, the ranch flourished. The land yielded healthy crops, the animals thrived, and the family grew stronger together. Visitors occasionally came to the ranch, marveling at the bond they witnessed, the quiet understanding between Thomas and Aylin, the confident, joyful presence of Little Star, and the life they had built together. The ranch had become more than a home. It was a place of hope, resilience, and love. In quiet moments, Thomas would sit on the porch with Aylin, watching Little Star play in the yard. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers, and the sun cast warm light across the land. They would speak softly of the past, the challenges they had overcome, and the future they hoped to build. Each day was a reminder of the journey they had shared, from the canyon rescue to the formation of a family, from uncertainty to trust, from care to love. And as the stars appeared in the sky above, Thomas, Aylin, and Little Star would sit together, hand in hand, heart to heart. The frontier, once vast and lonely, had become a place of belonging, safety, and joy. They had faced challenges, embraced love, and built a life that honored courage, trust, and family. The rancher, the mother, and the little girl had found what many spend a lifetime seeking: a home, a family, and the quiet, enduring happiness that comes from connection. Every act of care, every lesson taught, every smile shared had led them to this moment. And, in that life, filled with laughter, learning, and love, Thomas realized that the simple decision to follow a cry in the canyon had changed all of their fates forever. Together, they faced each day with hope, gratitude, and the knowledge that the bond they had built would carry them through any challenge. Their story was one of courage, trust, and love. A reminder that even in the most unexpected ways, life can bring people together, heal wounds, and create new beginnings. The little Apache girl, her mother, and the rancher had found more than safety and comfort. They had found family, and in doing so, they had changed their lives forever.